Hi, everyone. Welcome to Enterprise Unleashed, business law and innovation with experienced business strategist and trial attorney Richard P. Corey. Richard prides himself on striving to maximize his clients' desired outcomes in both transactional and litigation settings, so much so that he's got the nickname The Closer. I'm Sean O'Connor, and today we're talking about, well, what happens when business partners turn against each other, but also we've got a special guest. Little surprise for our listeners.
Yeah, Sean. Well, first of all, thanks for being here on the show with me. So today we're going to pivot a little bit, and I'm going to use that word. There's a reason for it. We have a very special guest. She is an elected official. She's part of the Delaware House of Representatives. She's also an up-and-coming comedian. She's one of the funniest people, most intelligent people I've ever met. And how we met was during our TEDx talk in November. And we kind of just bonded, came together. So listen, I want to really welcome to the show, Madinah Wilson-Anton. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Well, first of all, what's it like up in Delaware right now? I'm down in Florida. Are you freezing your butt off or what?
It's much colder than Florida, but as far as a northeastern winter goes, today's pretty mild. It's above freezing, so I'm not complaining.
When I introduced you, I spoke a little. I mentioned that you are a member of the Delaware House of Representatives. So, how did that happen? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so from a young age, I was interested in politics, and originally, I wanted to be an interpreter. And my dream job was to be an interpreter at the United Nations. And then I got to college and realized I probably wasn't going to be able to compete in that space as someone whose only native language was English. And so I pivoted, using that word again, to studying international relations. And so I got my degree in that, got an internship, and the internship was in the Delaware State House, and I applied because it was one of the only paid internships in political science. And very quickly, I found a love for public service at the state level. And so my first job out of college was working as a staffer. And then after a couple of years, I moved to the next gig. And my friends from my old job were like, hey, the guy who represents your area is retiring. Why don't you think about running for office? And I was like, you know what? Well, it's not too crazy of an idea. Why not? Let's give it a try. And the rest is history. I was elected in 2020 for the first time, and I'm now serving in my third term representing my hometown of Southern Newark Bear in the Delaware State House.
Wow. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't you beat out somebody who was a 22-year incumbent?
Yes, yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
And my former boss. So
what?
It was a little awkward. Yeah.
Well, what was that like, competing against your former boss?
Awkward, yeah. So originally he was talking about retiring, and so I went to him kind of like imagine like a mafia movie or whatever, right? Where I'm like going for his blessing, and he's like, actually, I think I'm gonna run again. And at that point, I'd already put a team together, and I started to think about how I could be good in the role, and I was like, oh, and he was like, so what if I told you I was going to run again? And I was like, I guess I'm running against you. And it was pretty awkward. It was pretty uncomfortable. And someone else got into the race. So it ended up being a 3-way primary. And my ragtag team of high school and college students, we were able to win by 43 votes.
That's wow. That was the margin, a total of 43 votes?
43 votes. Yeah. It was so close that there was talk of a recount. But eventually that got left on the table.
So like a big part of my show is I like talking about motivational aspects, especially incorporating the law, because I'm an attorney. But I love the fact that in 2020, I don't know how old you are, but 2020 was 6 years ago, that you had let me use this word, audacity to get up and run for office with no experience, in politics aside from your internship. So what brought you, this is very valuable information for young aspiring entrepreneurs, young women looking, to believe in themselves, to pursue their dreams. So, what inspired you?
It's going to sound kind of pessimistic, I guess, or nihilistic, but so there's this concept of the imposter syndrome, right? Where you feel like you're faking it and everyone's going to figure it out eventually that you're not meant to be in that space. Well, I worked in politics for a couple of years, and I very quickly saw that everyone in that space was just a regular person, right? Like it really, the experience demystified the space for me. And once it's not this mystical land where, everyone in office is uniquely qualified and like, then you start to realize, well, this is a representative democracy. It's meant to be that anyone from the community can come forward and run. And that's really, I think, why I wouldn't say it was an inspiration necessarily. It was just like this demystification of the role. And having people around me who supported me, who felt like it was worth giving it a shot. And I also wasn't working in politics anymore, so I wasn't afraid of being blacklisted, which is one of the things that tends to dissuade people from getting involved early is like, well, what if I want to run later on and no one supports me? I was like, if I lose, I lose. But I had this feeling like I thought I could bring something to the table that was positive for my community, and I knew I was going to feel guilt if I didn't step forward and try. And I kind of, it's kind of pessimistic, but I was like, hey, if I give it my best shot and I lose, then I'm off the hook.
Yeah.
Like I gave it a shot. Now I can go live my life. I actually found a journal entry I wrote to myself along those lines where I was like, hey, I'd be upset if I lost, but then I get to live my life.
You don't have to live through what if, what if.
Exactly. Yeah. That's liberating.
The demystification sort of process that you related, I think that's true across a lot of, especially, I'll say, upper echelon type roles where it doesn't matter who you are. If you're thinking, oh, I want to be an actor, I want to be an attorney, I want to be a judge, I want to be, a senator. I think there's a tendency to you hold those people with high esteem, and so that demystification thing is a real key. I think, just be like, oh, these are just regular folks who, as I joke, like to put their pants on one sleeve at a time, just like all of us.
All right, so let me talk about this. How did you go from, a very high stakes political campaign transitioning into taking the stage at a comedy show?
Yeah, so one of the things that I kind of promised to myself before I was elected was that I didn't want politics to consume my identity and to be, the only important thing in my life. So I started doing archery, which was a fun hobby just for me, because I was watching Arrow and I was like, I want to be like Oliver Queen. So I was very intentional about adding things to my life that brought purpose and fulfillment outside of politics. And I remember it was during the pandemic, and so I was in my at-home office, which was a walk-in closet, and I was doing an interview kind of like this, and I was talking on a panel about women in politics, and I noticed as I was giving my speech that I was dropping jokes in there that weren't written out in advance, and that I was really enjoying watching people laugh. More so than the rest of the speech, if we're being honest. And I was like, you know what? I need to just give it a shot. Like I always wanted to do comedy since I was a kid, and I'll take a class and this will be a skill that I can work on. That's different from politics. That's a way for me to stay grounded. And so I took this class, I signed up, I paid the money because I'm one of those people that like you got to pay for the gym membership or you won't work out kind of thing. Um, and so I went to this class for 6 weeks, and one of the first assignments he gave us was to go to an open mic. And so I went to a bar about 30 minutes from where I live, which was, I don't frequent bars really. So that was an interesting experience. And I told my jokes and people didn't laugh. And then I had to do it again. And once people start to laugh and you start to figure it out, it's really addicting. And that was almost 4 years ago.
So when did you decide that like comedy was going to be your voice?
So when I first started doing comedy, I didn't tell anybody, like at work. I thought I would keep it to myself. I thought it was going to be used against me in politics, and I was like writing the opposition commercials for my opponent, like, do you want a clown to represent you? And like stuff like that. And I was just like, I can't let anybody know I'm doing this. this is for me, and like I got to keep this private. And then I was at an open mic and I got off stage and someone in the crowd came over to me and was like, "Aren't you a state rep?" And I was like, "Oh no."
Maybe.
Cover blown.
So then I was like, "All right, I guess I gotta own this and just own the narrative on this one." So I started doing stuff more publicly, and it was going well, and I really enjoyed it. So I just kind of locked in.
You know what's something that I just started thinking about as you're talking, and as Sean was talking. Um, if I were to like come up with two of the most criticized professions, I would say politicians and comedians. Because I've seen people get heckled on stage. I have a background. I've managed several comedians. I've never been on stage as a comic myself, but I've put on comedy shows. I've worked with a lot of big names in the industry actually. But there's a lot of times where as a politician, your life gets turned upside down by your opponent, and then as a comic, if you have. It's very easy to lose a crowd. Now I'm sure you don't. I've seen your shows. You're hilarious. But
That doesn't. I'm not immune. It's happened. It's happened more than I would like, but that's part of the process of getting better. And I mean, even experienced comics don't always crush. So, but yeah, you're right. Both professions are often criticized.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I don't know, adjacency almost. I'm thinking about, okay, the State of the Union, as we're speaking, the State of the Union just happened, and comics are riffing on current events, right? That's a very common thing, and often about politicians. And so now, Madinah, as a politician, you get to riff on comics, or I know you're probably not busting the chops of your colleagues.
Yeah, I try not to like antagonize my colleagues too
Of
much in
course.
that space, but it has become a little bit more difficult to avoid politics in comedy. I think it's funny that you see them as adjacent, though, where a lot of times when I tell people that I do both, they're like, those are very different careers. But I think they have a lot in common. Aside from the fact that there's a lot of clowns in both spaces, um, that's a joke. There's also like a skill set that's
not
needed for
untrue.
both, right? Which is like to be able to communicate to people that are different than you, to relate to an audience quickly, to communicate a message. Like, and a lot of politicians use comedy to diffuse tension. I mean, some of the best State of the Unions have jokes in them, right? Um, they're not always great jokes, but there's an attempt, and there is definitely also this feeling amongst a lot of comedians that we are meant to push, the society forward. And there's the expression of the jester and the king and being able to point out things right in the court. So there is definitely some synergy.
Yeah. Well, see also the correspondence dinner, right? A tradition of
Mhm.
the president typically putting on his comedic hat to joust with the crowd, so
So one thing I'm wanted to bring up. So me as an attorney, one of the things that I preach to my clients, my staff, anyone I work with is we don't compromise our integrity for anyone. That's one of those things, and you have to stay true to your values. Ethics and morality are the most important things, at least in my profession, but also as a politician. And I know a lot of what you do is faith based. So how would you describe not compromising the values that are important to you, including your faith, in a world of politics or in comedy where it's almost inherently self compromising?
I mean, I think there's different approaches. I mean, there are comedians who put on a character on stage, that is different from who they are. And there are some people who love comedy and the arts because of that, because they can step out from who they are. And like, there are folks you might meet who are, performers or that have anxiety, that are very introverted, and they're like, it's different because I'm doing a character when I'm on stage. I don't approach comedy that way. When I perform, I am trying my best to be as genuine and authentic and raw as possible. So there are some topics I just don't touch because I don't feel comfortable being vulnerable in those spaces in public. And so the issues that I bring up, I often, in my comedy talk, I take a self-deprecating lens a lot of the time. I talk about issues that are relatable to lots of people. I don't talk about necessarily issues that divide rooms, because I don't feel like I don't want to pander like some folks have done, and like I've seen comedians do this, pander to audiences, and so I just will avoid those topics. If I feel like I can't win the crowd over with my perspective, then I'll talk about something where I know that I can. Now in politics, uh, I am very, very raw. And I've gotten into trouble for that, like amongst my colleagues, but with my constituents, it's always been appreciated. And there have been times where I've sat back and I'm like, was that a bit too much? And then I'll get an email from a constituent who's like, keep it up. Don't back down. And I'm like, okay, noted, you know? Um, but yeah, I think for me to enjoy comedy, I've got to be able to be myself. There are some people who like to, like I said, put on like kind of a character and assume a persona on stage that's not truly who they are. And I just don't feel comfortable doing that.
Nor should you. That's one
No.
of those things that's going to help, separate you from, a lot of the competition in both professions. Same thing in my profession. Now, I know you've been asked about this probably 100 times. You've probably talked about it on multiple shows, but how did you go about winning Delaware's dirtiest comic or filthiest comic as a clean comedian? So that's a little bit of a conundrum here. I love it. I want to hear it.
Yeah, so that was like I guess the main story I used for my TED Talk where we met.
That's what
So
I'm getting
I was
to. But
about yeah, I was like maybe a year and a half into comedy. I was pretty new. And the local comedy booker who hosts an open mic every week tapped me to compete in his annual filthiest comic competition, and I was like I was like, I guess I can write some jokes. And he was like, no, like, just do your material. And I'm like, but it's the filthiest competition and I'm a clean comic. I don't like I have some poop jokes. That's about as filthy as it gets. Like I don't I don't have and I thought about writing some jokes to the crowd, like for that show. And it just didn't feel right. Like to your earlier question about like staying true to yourself and your values, I just was like, that's not who I am on stage. I don't want to step away from my values to try to please this one group. And I felt really uncomfortable about it. And I was at a birthday party before the competition, and I was like, I'm so anxious because I was like, I'm just gonna lose. Like I'm gonna be the first person eliminated. It's gonna be embarrassing. This is a waste of my time. But I was like, I'm just gonna stick with my normal material. And um, the guy who went up before me was like kind of bashing women, and so I took the first minute or so to just like bash him back. And I remember
God,
he mentioned something about his wife, and I said, he mentioned his wife, but I don't believe he's married. Do you guys believe he's married? I feel like he made that up. And I started with that, and then I went into my material, and it was like an audience poll to see who would win. And everyone else, for the most part, I'd seen their material before. They all went extra dirty. Like they weren't doing their regular material. They were just going for the bottom of the barrel kind of, And yeah, and they had us all up on stage and did this like person by person elimination. And so he eliminated the person with the least votes first, and I was like, it's gonna be me. And it was one of my friends, and he eliminates him and he's like, get out of here. And then he just went live like person by person. And when it got to about three of us left, I was like, why am I still on stage? Like this is crazy. And then it was two of us on stage, and I was like, I know I'm number two. There's no
you're kind
way
of
that
like
I'm
looking
one.
around like, what's going on here?
Yeah, and the guy who was on stage with me, he was like dabbing people up because he was like, "Yeah, we got this, we got this," and he did not got this. It was crazy, but it was one of those moments in my life where I felt like, okay, I gotta write this in my journal because the turmoil up to that decision and then the way that it went was a great lesson for me in staying true to myself.
Mm.
And since then, I've had other instances where I've felt like maybe I shouldn't have stuck to my guns, and then I get this like confirmation that no, that was the right thing to do. And I tried my best to just document them all because it gets easy, I think, when you're in the thick of it to doubt yourself, to question whether making difficult decisions was the right thing to do. But I think it always works out when you make the right decision based on your values. It's always going to work out, whether it's in the short term or the long term.
Sure.
But yeah, that was a really formative experience for me. And I try to go back to that lesson often to remind myself to stay true to my values and not to pander, not to, switch up based on the space that I'm in, and just to be authentically myself.
Yeah.
Well, all of this was leading up to, and especially when I said pivot, the theme of the TED Talks where we met just happened to be pivot. Now, we're coming up to the end of this episode, so what we're going to do is we're going to stop it here. But the next part two of this episode, we're going to get into how I saw you on stage when I first walked into TEDx. We're going to talk about that TEDx experience and how we can motivate others to have the courage to believe in themselves and take those steps, whether it's a career path, a hobby, or getting up on stage in front of a bunch of people and spreading innovative thoughts. So I want to thank you for coming on today. We're going to finish it up with part two soon. Sean, you want to take it out?
Yeah, for sure. I'm really curious to hear what your TED Talk was about. But I'm sure we'll cover that, Richard. Beyond obviously the pivot. So such a great story. I'm glad I could be here with you and Richard both. For those of you watching from home, that's it for today's episode of Enterprise Unleashed, Business Law Innovation with attorney Richard P. Corey. Obviously, this was a very special episode. To connect with Richard, visit the website, rcenterpriselaw.com. Don't forget to leave a review, and subscribe for more conversations like this on strategy, law, and innovation. And you never know what special guests might show up. Thanks a lot.